everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director. The original podcast made by a creative director for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, and for creatives of all types. Welcome back to the program. I am your host, Jaime Cabrera, veteran creative director. And I don't know if you know this, but I've been kind of quiet about it. I've been a little bit shy. Haven't been talking about it too much on LinkedIn. But I am the author of a new book geared towards aspiring creative directors. It's a field manual of sorts. It's everything that you need to know about the role, how to prepare for it, what you can expect. It's called What's the Big Idea? An Indispensable Guide to Becoming a Kick-Ass Creative Director. So if you're somebody who's looking to become a kick-ass creative director, pick that up. It's available on Amazon or through my website, JaimeCabreraCreative.com. And speaking of kick-ass creative directors, on today's show, we have creative director Sarah Mae Bates. She works for the amazing agency RPA in Santa Monica, California. She is a true multi-hyphenate. Not only is she a creative director, but she's also an author. She's a licensed therapist, marriage counselor. She's a director. Has been directing some spots. She is a stunt car driver. She has a podcast with millions and millions of listeners. She's got a blog. And most importantly, she's just a really, really great person. I think you guys are going to take a lot away from this conversation. We go deep. We get into a lot of cool stuff about therapy and working on yourself and getting through to becoming really your best self, which is something that she's really passionate about. So without further ado, Sarah Mae Bates. Sarah Mae Bates. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I always love it when people have three names. It just sounds so... I don't know. It just adds a certain air to it. Sarah Mae Bates.
It's way more searchable on the old Google too.
Is that was that by design? Maybe did you add that in there just to make it more?
Literally, yeah.
How's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing
Thank you
well.
for
I'm
having
excited.
me on. It's an honor.
No, it's great to have you on. We've been trying to make this happen for a few weeks now, so I'm glad that we finally made it happen. What's going on over there? You seem to be a very, very busy person. You got all kinds of stuff going on with your day job, and then you've got your podcast, and you've got your blog, and which we'll get into all of that. But give us a little overview of how you got to where you are now. Just sort of give us the rundown, your career trajectory, as it were.
Yeah, I've been called multi-hyphenate. That's my, that's what I guess my my defining trait is. Yeah, I have a master's in marriage and family therapy, which I did while I was still practicing as a creative director, which is, as you can imagine, a shit ton of work. So I was working as a therapist on weekends while working as a creative director on the weekdays. I'm no longer doing that, but it still has very much informed my podcast, which is basically all about creativity and mental health and self-realization, I guess.
Yeah.
Or actualization. And it's one of those things that I can't not do. It's very much an outlet, and for everything that I'm processing or anything I'm moving through or the lessons I learn in my own life. So it's it's almost like I have to put it out there, even if it was going to nobody, I would still be making it. So it's very much a joy project. And then work-wise, I am at RPA, which is very close to where you are. I'm in Santa Monica, and I am a VP creative director. I work on Honda mostly, but I also work on new business and a couple other random projects that come through, like PBS Kids and Leica and a couple others.
Yeah, I was doing my research and looking at some of the work, and it's interesting, and we'll talk about this some more, but it's interesting how I feel like, and I'll be curious to get your take on how some of the work that you do outside of your day job sort of factors in there. And one of the spots that caught my eye was one on your book, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so you've been at RPA for what, 10 years now?
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
And how did you start off? Because as you said, you're a multi-hyphenate, right? So as I was looking at your profile here, you write, but you're also a designer. You're an art director. You kind of do it all. So how did you get to where you are now? Give us sort of the background on that.
Well, I think like most people in college, you're kind of like, I don't know what I want to do. And you're like looking at the majors and you're looking at what the requirements are. And I'm like, I don't really know what these things are. So I just kind of picked based on like the general areas of like the electives you got to take. So advertising, actually both my parents did some form of advertising in my childhood, but advertising had like a little bit of everything. And I loved that. So I got to take film. I got to take some history. I went to Art Center in Pasadena, but it allowed me to like dabble in all of the disciplines. Cause at first I was like, maybe I'll be an illustrator. Cause I love drawing. But anyway, you graduate and then you're like, and now I have to get a job. And so you end up getting a job. And so the first job I had was art director. And I really wanted to be a good art director. And it was never really fun. You know, I got good at it and I like worked as an art director for maybe, I want to say 7 years, but it was one of those things that stressed me out so much. Like I could never really like enjoy the process. It was a lot of like, it took a lot of research and a lot of like private work where I'm like, don't look, you know, like I hated people sitting behind me while I was comping, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then when I was at my agency, my partner left and then it was just me solo. And they didn't hire me a partner for a while. And so I was like, in order to sell work, I just had to keep producing work. And I ended up really liking writing more. I mean, I think just because I really like storytelling, that aspect of advertising. And, you know, script writing is visual. So it's kind of the same job. It's just like you owe different things at the end of the day. So anyway, when I was doing both jobs, I built some credits up as a writer. So that allowed me to transition over to being a writer. Cause I was like, at the end of the day, I want to be the person that's staying late at night that owes the words and doesn't owe the comps. That said, it's so helpful to do both. Like to be able to do both today is like, I'm so grateful I've done both jobs because it's like, sometimes I do have to do all of it myself. And like, it's nice to be able to just build a deck and send it out and not have to like stop somebody and be like, hey, can you show me how to do this?
Right.
So that's kind of how I train people now. It's like, you should know how to do all things just in case you have to do them. And you're not using half of your person in the rest of your life. Like use all of yourself at your job too, no matter what your title is. So like know how to build a deck, know how to pull scrap, know how to, and if you're an art director, like know how to write everything. Just use your brain like you talk to somebody, you know?
That's really cool. And it brings me to this thought of how does that kind of factor into the way that you see the role of being a creative director? Because you can see both of those things. How would you describe the role of being a creative director to somebody else?
I think it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe a sculptor. It's almost like I think of creativity or concepting as like there is an ideal or perfect solution to the problem. Like the solution is finite and everybody's really just like chiseling away at that block to find out what it is and just polish away all the extraneous stuff to make it that. And I think like having both skill sets, it really allows you to do that and hear it better, I guess. Whereas sometimes like, I know you write songs.
Right.
And I can produce music. I can't write music. But it's like there's just something innate that you're like, I know where this wants to go. And you're like listening for the right answer in other people's work. So if anything, I think it just makes that a little maybe stronger.
Yeah.
To hear the notes.
So when you were talking a few minutes ago about how you now incorporate sort of what you went through as a way to train the people that you manage, how do you do that? Like, are there certain things that you certain techniques or certain things that you try to teach them to show them sort of that that two-sided sort of approach that you have of writing and the visual part?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person, but usually, like, if there's anybody that's a junior, I do a lot of trainings with our any of the creative interns. Like, that's kind of my role as far as like the creative department goes. But if anybody's on my team, if they have like a skill set that needs boosting, I'll usually sit with them individually and just like give them the hacks. And
Really?
usually what I'm doing is I'm giving them all the cheats, just because it's like it can be so intimidating, and I think a lot of people feel like, well, I didn't go to design school, or I didn't go anywhere to get trained to do this, and I'm like, you don't need that. Like, this is real. You already know how to do all of this. It's almost like talking to them in metaphors. Like, it's kind of like you're doing this, but in here. And like when you're talking to clients, you got to do it this way, and like just picture it this way. It's really just making it less formal and way more, you know what you're doing. Like, you got to lean into your own confidence.
I love teaching with metaphors because it's just so easy to, kind of understand. So what are these, can we expect you to like put these hacks out there? Maybe this is add another thing to your list. Maybe you need to publish these hacks. I'm curious. And it's really refreshing to hear that you are that buttoned up in your approach, that when somebody comes into your team or into the agency, that you have these trainings, or that you have this available to them, because that's not something that you hear very often, right? It's a lot of times it's kind of like sink or swim, or you're going to learn as you go. But that's kind of refreshing that you have sort of. Are these like formalized? Like, do you have like a presentation, or is it more just kind of a conversation? Or tell us more about that, because that's super fascinating.
My training is a presentation, so that's formal, but it's just like very simple slides, and then it's just me talking and giving anecdotes. And I feel like that just makes it less like, as a junior, I remember there being so many acronyms that I didn't know, and so many like, I didn't know the decorum, I guess, for all these situations. And so it's like, I'm trying to give everybody all of that stuff. Like, there's nothing that you should be too afraid to ask, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And if you are too afraid to ask, like, ask me and I'll tell you. And then when I'm sitting with people, sometimes I'm doing, practicing presentations with them, or sometimes the other thing I want to do with most people, especially if they're, just starting, is like, I want them to leave with a better book than when they started. So a lot of the time what I'm doing is I'm reviewing portfolios, and I'm saying, like, this is how this looks to the outside world. This is what I would do if I were you while you're here. These are the types of pieces I would put in your book, and this is like why I want to see these if I don't know anything about you. So I think I don't know, I'm just trying to put myself in the position of being young or being at a different stage in my career, because it's like, it's so scary and like nebulous. Like, you know all these agency names, you don't really know who does what, you don't know like how to get in there, or like how you're perceived. So I don't know, I think it's like in some ways it's similar to my podcast, where I'm very much helping myself through other people, like talking about stuff I'm struggling with, and it's like helpful for me to process, kind of thing.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, it sounds like you create, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, right? It sounds like you're creating a really safe environment for all your creatives to feel, safe, obviously, but also empowered to ask questions and to feel like, like there are no dumb questions, and they belong, and they're able to share ideas without ridicule. So tell us about kind of the environment, because a lot of times, and I make a joke about this, right? It's like what we see portrayed in advertising agencies as a cool environment is like people riding around on scooters, and there's a pool table, and there's a bar. And what I've talked about is like, who gives a shit if you have all that stuff, but you have a crappy environment where you don't feel safe to share ideas, or it's kind of cliquey, or there's secrecy, or people don't want to collaborate, or there's silos. Or can you share a little bit about how you create that environment? Because it sounds like you do have that. Would you say is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. I mean, if you look at the track record of RPA, like nobody leaves. It's like really insane. Like people I work with have been there for like since before I was born. Like it's crazy. And that is because it's like it is a true ethic to the company that like people don't treat other people badly, and like your life matters, and like your life also comes first. So I feel like that's, I don't know, it's a rare place in this industry, but it's definitely like a true thing. So one of the things I would say, like their tagline, I worked on the positioning for the agency, and we were trying to figure out like what do we have that nobody else has as far as other agencies go. And I'm like, oh, people. We're really nice people, and we're really good to people, and we think about people in terms of our messaging. And like I personally, as far as work goes, I very much want people to be happy when they watch my work, and I want them to feel respected, and I want them to be entertained or get something useful out of it. Like that is my goal. And that ethic is true for just the creative department, and I think the agency as a whole. So it's like, if your sister's getting married and it's at the same time as a shoot, like you're going to go to your sister's wedding, and we'll find coverage for the shoot. Like that's definitely like the way we think. And what I think it does most is it makes people feel very invested and very valued. And it shows in just how people listen to one another and how people respect one another in meetings. Like there's not a lot of like, I don't know, that thing where account people will treat creative people like, oh, you're trying to get away with something, and like, you're always about talking about yourselves, and like there's that weird antagonistic, like we don't have that. So
that's
it's like,
great.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I've been in a lot of agencies where it was the opposite, and it's just like it can ruin everything about a job just to have one person that's rude or backstabbing or I don't know, dismissive. Yeah. Like it changes the chemistry of an entire day just to have one of those people you interact with.
And so what are your thoughts on, because I write about this in my book about, kind of like formula relationships with all the other groups within the agency, right? And you brought up the age-old battle between account and creative. And so it sounds like you don't have that battle there. But do you include them in your process when you're coming up with concepts? And if so, how do they factor in? Because what I found is typically those folks got into this business because they want to be involved with the creative in some way. Maybe they themselves are not trained designers or writers or whatever, but they have some kind of creative bent to them. And they've figured that the best way for them to be involved is sort of on the account business side. But they have ideas, right? They're creative too. Do you involve them in the process? And if so, how do you do that?
I mean, they're definitely busy enough that I don't think they are trying to get in on the like concepting rounds. But then when we do have creative reviews, like they'll throw out solves, and like we take them to heart. So to be completely honest, like ideas can and do come from everywhere.
Right.
They don't normally come from other departments, but like they can. We're not at all closed off to that. And sometimes if we do disagree, like if something comes from an account person and they say like, we're not bringing that, or like that's totally off. Usually what it takes is like a one-on-one conversation to understand the thinking, and then consensus will come out of that. I feel like when you have a really tight-knit group and you work together for so many years, you really do just know people and know where they're coming from and know that they're not saying it for no reason. So
right. And typically that might be something that they know about the client, or something they've heard recently, or some new piece of information that they may not have shared, or they can't share, or there's any number of reasons, right?
Absolutely.
And so typically it's more of a they may be building on ideas or offering, sort of different tweaks or things of that nature. That's more of how they fit in. Yeah.
Totally. Or to your point, I think it is often like, oh, we just heard this one note and this is why we're reacting. And then we can address that specific note. So it's client related.
Can you tell us a little bit more? So we've talked a little bit about that part of your process, but what other, let's say you've got a new, some new assignment comes in. What does a typical process look like from that point forward? And understanding that it's always different, I'm sure, but are there some standard things that you do? Are you really big on sort of the briefing phase, or kind of give us a kind of a an inside view of how things work on your team?
I'll take
if
like
you
an
can.
Ideal. Yeah. I mean, I'll take an
sharing
ideal
secrets
example.
Here. Okay.
An ideal example would be like something that's a big new launch of something, or
Right.
it's, a big campaign that's got like the sky's the limit kind of thing. And, that when we get that kind of brief, it's like, it could be anything. So it's really at the beginning is like trying to get the box smaller and smaller just for people to be able to like hit the target better. And so usually what I'll do is I'll just spend some time thinking about what work is similar, like what are we aiming for? What could it be? And then once I can kind of digest it in my own head, then it's like a mini version of a strategy where I meet with creatives and I just talk about like, this is the strategy. This is like these are the types of things out there that are somewhat related to what we're aiming for. If we could integrate XYZ from our history in our own work and create something that's in this vein, that would be a sweet spot. And then, I mean, in some ways when you work with a team long enough, you're speaking in shorthand, but it's kind of like, it's the creative department's version of a strategy, I guess, is what I start with.
So, okay, this is interesting. So typically, and all agencies are different, right? So is there a whole strategy side that you're working with as well? But
Absolutely.
they're not typically, how involved are they in coming up with the brief, or do they come up with a strategic brief and then you have a separate creative brief, or how does it? Is that the way it works? Okay.
To rewind, Strategy's already been working on the strategy for, let's say, a year. And they have like funneled all of this information and kind of distilled it into like a sentence. And like they have a deck they presented, and then the account department has presented also the brief. So we know exactly the media, we know exactly the strategy and the why, like why we're doing this, who we're talking to, and why.
Yep.
But sometimes when something is lofty, that's still like the sky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when we get all of those materials, the first thing after that for me is to like distill that into like, what kind of executions are we trying to do here? And like, how should it sound? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's usually especially helpful for younger creatives. Just because that thing when you're young, you start to like try and talk like a commercial would talk, or you try, like you're like, if you don't know exactly what to say, it's like you try to sound like you know what to say. And that's like, those efforts are not necessarily useful. So usually what I talk to individual creatives about is like, these are examples of your work that I think would be awesome for something like this. Like lean into these skills that you already have. You're really great at finding incredible new visual effects techniques. Like this type of thing would be great for this. This type of thing would be great for this. This type of thing would be great for this. Like channel that. Bring me more of that. And you know what I mean? Like some other creatives are better at like narrative. So I'll be like, okay, imagine this is like you're writing for blank. So yeah, as I said, metaphors.
That's cool. Metaphors are great, and I wrote this one down about you're just trying to make the box smaller and smaller, right? Which a lot of people think that it's the opposite, right? It's like, oh, it's completely open. And it's like, no, that's not.
That's so
good.
hard.
You want constraints. Otherwise, A, it's a lot harder, and B, you're not. I mean, they're not, the ideas aren't like laser focused, right? They're sort of, it's like the more constraints that you can apply is better. You agree with that?
I totally agree. At least as a beginning, just to like figure out, to have something to react to. Cause it's like the thing will tell you what it wants to be. And it's like really on us to just give ourselves feedback, to be able to look at an object and talk about the object and then respond to it. It's like that will teach us what it wants to be, but we need to like start somewhere. And in order to start, I think we just need to we have to narrow down the target enough.
Yeah. So, and you've already kind of painted a pretty good picture, but if I were to ask some people that are on your team, some people that you oversee, what would they say about your approach, or what other things might they share about the way that you coach, or that you mentor, or that you provide feedback? What do you think that they would say, or what would you want them to say? Because I like your approach, and it's different from some of the other folks that I've had on the show. So I like how you're kind of using their own work to help them figure out, what this new work is. That's something that I've never really. I've heard of other people saying, "Hey, it should feel like this," and they're pointing to other work outside the agency or from other brands or other competitors or whatever. But this idea of like looking at their individual work, that's interesting to me.
I think that also helps with confidence, because I mean, I'm not sure when you were born, but like my generation, when I came up in advertising, like people were like not the nicest. I would say, like you were there was a lot of harassment, and it was okay, and it was kind of like much more cutthroat, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was excused. And now I think like at least the younger generation is very, very sensitive and way more aware, I would say. And like, I think one of the things I've learned just as a manager is like, what I have to do to guide creative is first start to like make them understand they're good at what they're doing, and like remember that. Because like we really have to be in that energy in order to be creative people. We have to learn to get in that flow state where we're feeling like inspired, artistic, like expressive, like we have something new that we can express that other people want to hear. And when we're in that energy, like so much great stuff comes out. So I think first for me is to start with people's strengths and say like, you know what you're doing, you did it here. This is what I want to see more of. Like if you could combine this with this is this new symphony that comes out of those two disparate things. Like It's kind of like teaching people how to play. It's like leaning into a new area based on where they already have been, but like pushing themselves into a new area. So that seems to have been effective, especially with very young people.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is it's almost like you're beating them to the imposter syndrome punch. In other words, before they start to get into their own head, you're already kind of telling them, you're kind of validating, like you're already good at this. So before they start getting in their own head, you're already kind of beating them to the punch. Because I think as I mentioned to you previously, that's probably the biggest thing that I hear from people on the podcast is just how everybody still struggles with imposter syndrome. So it's kind of that's what it sounds like to me. Is that?
Oh, totally.
Is that what you're sort of doing?
I think so. And I would also say it's like how I look for talent as well. It's like, it's not necessarily about resume or work experience. It's really about like the person and the person and what they have to say and what experiences they have to draw from. Cause like a lot of people we've brought on recently are like, this is their third career, or they have, they had to take a break for a while from their career. It's like, or they haven't been, trained trained at a design school or whatever it is. And I think it comes down to like, what is kind of the unique cocktail that they bring to the creative department, and like how they can give us a new voice that's not the same, cookie cutter voice that we get from a lot of the same types of people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something that you were talking about, right? Which is how this industry in the past, hasn't always been the nicest, right? And it was almost kind of like it was almost like I've met people that came up in that time as well that took on those same bad habits, right? Because they thought that's the way it was supposed to be, right? You're supposed to berate the people underneath you, and you're supposed to make them, stay late, and you're supposed, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff, because that's the way that it happened to them, and they just figured, well, I guess that's the way you do it, and that's the way you build these people up. But how did you manage to sort of do a 180 on that? Because your approach is completely the opposite of that. How did you escape that? Because I have met some people that just completely kept that going, and they crashed and burned. But how did you make that switch, or how did you not let it?
Yeah, I think it's probably in part just the natural evolution I had as a person. I think a lot of the time people who are really abusive are really insecure, and they're just externalizing all of the feelings they have inside onto other people and making people respect them or cower or fear them because they have fear in themselves. So I think as a young person, I was definitely super defensive. Like I remember, I can just remember myself as like a junior and being like, no, I like it that way. Like everything was like don't criticize me. And it was like, I could tell it was really frustrating for people who managed me. And cause it's like, you can't hear when you're defensive. You just like block everything out. And I think as I started to get some confidence, like I won quite a bit of awards like early on. And I was like, oh, that's what I was thinking was so important. Like, huh. All right, it's like you see behind the curtain kind of, you're like, that's not changing how I feel about myself. And I really, what I had to do is do like a ton of work in therapy. Yeah. I had like, I don't know, probably a good 5 or 6 years where I just worked on myself. It wasn't initiated by advertising, but it definitely changed who I was everywhere, in my work self, in my relationship self, in my being by myself self, like all of that changed. And I just could see myself as like, I could receive for the first time. And like, I could be flexible. I could be open. And I think that it's just like another version of maturity. So as a mature person coming up in a creative field, you can see people, you can hear what they're going through. You cannot take things personally. It's like things don't land on me anymore. And they used to. Like if somebody was rude to me back in the day, I'd be like, why did they do that? What did I do? I didn't even do anything to them. Like, why are they mean to me? Why are they mad at me? And work situations, boss employee or boss subordinate relationships very much mirror like caregiver child relationships, like as far as how we experience them. So a lot of people will relive a lot of like childhood stuff and kind of project it onto their boss. But a lot of that stuff is like so unconscious. So after all my work in therapy, I feel like I grew up and I like could see everything for what it was. And I wasn't taking things personally. Like I wasn't taking my boss personally anymore. I wasn't taking other people's feelings personally. And it just allows you to like be an open source of compassion for people. It's awesome. I recommend therapy to anybody who will possibly listen to me.
Yeah. I love how you're so open about this. And was this around the same time that you started the podcast and the blog, or when did that happen? Was it after you were done with the therapy? And in some ways, was it sort of a continuation of that?
Oh, totally.
Therapy?
Totally. I did. I started it it was probably later than that, but it was like basically my version of trying to give people everything I got. Because I was like, hey, everyone needs to know about this. This is the best thing ever. Yeah. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? And I'm like, I just want to sing it from the rooftop. So that's definitely where it comes from. Because it's like getting a key to a whole different version of the world. You're like, everybody, what? All I feel is love. It's like, I would totally love to give it to everybody.
Okay, so let's talk about each one sort of individually. So the podcast is Help Me Be Me. So kind of give us, and I love the tagline here, which is self-help for people who hate self-help.
Yeah.
So give us the sort of the slug line for this. Besides that, like what can people expect to hear on the podcast?
You can learn everything about me that you probably would want to know. It's a lot of me talking. So I think most people go to podcasts because they want to hear interviews. This is not interviews. I mean, there are a couple, but it's just me talking. It's literally me talking to you like we're really good friends. And I'm just like breaking something down. And it actually started as me talking to myself. And I was like doing voice memos to myself just to like ground and remind myself of like the truth and like how to reorient to like where I want to go. And then I started asking like maybe somebody else would be helped by this. Like maybe I should post this. And that's kind of what a couple of the early episodes are. But to answer your question, they're practical tools and tips for anyone who wants to grow their source of self-love and I guess fulfill their goals. Like if people feel stuck, I used to be so stuck in so many like gnarly issues. I was a drug addict. I had eating disorders. I had so many problems that were just chronic, and I tried everything I could to stop. And I really didn't realize that like all of the things that I was doing were a result of all of these things that everybody in the world, if they had been through what I had been through, would do exactly the same thing I was doing. And once I learned that, I was like, oh, it's not me. It's not my problem. It's something that everybody would do. It like was a key that just unlocked that for me. And then of course I could tackle it and work through all of the causes, and then they went away. But I think a lot of people, when they're stuck, they just think that they're dumb or they're incapable or they're not smart enough to solve it. And so I guess the podcast is it's tackling a bunch of like really gnarly, overwhelming things and saying like, hey, if this is happening to you, you're not an idiot and you're not unique. It's probably because of X, Y, or Z. And here's a couple of things that I would do if you are in this situation right now.
That's amazing. And it must have, and probably continues to touch a lot of people, because we were talking earlier and you mentioned to me that pretty early on it got recognized by Apple as like a top podcast, and it went seemingly overnight, right? You like woke up one morning and you realized that you had all these subscribers. Tell us about that. Yeah.
Well, it was one of those things, there are, I don't know how many, let's say 3 trillion podcasts out there. There are so many podcasts, and I was just putting them out there. And I had like a vision board that it was like, if I've helped one person, that's all that matters. And that's just how I did it for years. And I just kept putting them out there. And I'm like, I remember one day I looked at my whatever stats page and it was like millions of people. And I was like, what? Is this a glitch? This has got to be a glitch. And then I looked at Apple's homepage and it was like the top podcast in health. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? But yeah, I mean, awesome. I also had a blog that I used to write for Hello Giggles that was like, I don't know how many years, probably 10 years or something that I was writing for them. And that was kind of the beginning of it. So a lot of the work also lived on that site. So I have had some listenership before that. It was just, that made me blow up.
That's so cool. And so does the blog, which is Yay with Me, do they kind of work together, or are they separate, but they cover some of the same ground?
So Yay With Me is like just the hub. So I've written a couple books, and I have another podcast with a girl who has an app called Mend that is a breakup app. And then I have a breakup podcast album, which is like for anyone that goes through a breakup. And I also coach people. So all of that is like, Yay With Me is the hub of all of the things I do.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know about. I missed that part. I didn't know about the books. Now we got to go into the books. Like, what? Tell me about the books.
I wrote them a long time ago now, so I probably would, like, if I reread them, I'd be like, I got to edit this.
Yeah.
Like, it's never done. But one is just like, it's basically a collection of the tools I have. And if I were to publish it today, it would be like 500 pages longer. But it's it's just like I would call it like the triage toolkit for if you're like in a stage of emotional suffering. It's called Help Me Be Me, a self-care toolkit. And so it's like for all the stages of like emotional pain you might go through, that's what's in there. And then the other one is a journal, and that's like a daily journal. It's just like the process I do myself as far as daily journaling goes, but it just synthesizes it into a little, you can fill it out on every day kind of thing.
Wow. That's really cool. So now kind of coming back to what I mentioned earlier, how do all these experiences and all the things that you've been through start to show up in the work? Because, and maybe it's just in the work that you chose to highlight on your portfolio site. But for example, like the yearbook spot for Honda felt like I could see that coming from you, because it was you're coaching people, and I love it, and I had forgotten about it. I as soon as I started playing it, I'm like, I remember this spot.
When you start out, you might not know where you're going, or what you're doing, or why you're carrying this red rose with you.
You just keep going. Keep your focus and avoid the distractions.
At times, you may fall flat on your face. But technically, that's still moving forward.
You gotta pick yourself up, make some moves, and do it all with a smile.
Believe in yourself. You think that any of these folks believed that I'd make it?
Definitely not.
That was a rhetorical question, Daryl.
But how do all these experiences start to find their way into your work? I'm sure it does, right? Totally. And I'm sure I'm sure you've recognized it, or maybe you haven't. But
yeah, I think what I'm doing with my podcast is the same thing I'm trying to do with my advertising work, which is like inspire people and make them feel empowered. And like, I do think yearbooks is definitely like the most aligned with my ethos as a person, which is like never give up. And like,
right, everybody's
been in a hard spot in their life, and like you can't let that ever deter you from going for it. Because I mean, it literally comes down to how bad you want it. If you decide you want to do something, you can absolutely do anything you want to do. It's just like, how committed are you to that goal?
Yeah.
I completely believe that.
And have you seen it, in other, I saw the work also for PBS Kids, and have there been other examples? And do you recognize it instantly, or are you just so used to, yourself and how you see the world that you stop to recognize it? Or do you go like, oh, I see why I maybe wrote this, or why I did it this way?
Well, I have to give a shout out to Gabriel, who was the copywriter on the PBS Kids work, because it was his first project ever as a copywriter, and it's now nominated for an Emmy.
Wow.
So it's pretty exciting. Yeah. But yeah, I think that work definitely, it feels totally true for me as a parent. And it's it's a very sweet portrait of humanity and like a truth that I think so many people can relate to. I definitely believe that like everything I put out in the world, I will very much try and ensure it's representing somebody in a way that is uplifting and like not in any way disparaging, and hopefully connects on like an emotional level that resonates, but I think for sure yearbooks is like a very help me be me kind of message.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's why it was just like, it was just kind of like a full circle moment. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Now, obviously Honda is a brand that you can do that for. Have you ever in your career been on an assignment or on a client that you just couldn't relate to? Not that they were, doing anything bad necessarily, but you just couldn't relate to it. And how do you deal with that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like can you sort of, and I'm sure you can, but can you just put yourself in a completely different mindset that maybe it's not the way that you are as a person. Does that make sense? I mean, and obviously we have to do that because that's part of our job, but you've probably gotten to a place maybe in your career where you can kind of be a little bit more picky, maybe?
Well, I do get probably, I probably get better projects today than I did when I was starting. Just, I guess that has been kind of like being based on like setting the right goals. But I will say, like, I've been on projects where I didn't feel like, sometimes you present so many ideas where you're like, this could be amazing. Like, this could be the first time that a brand like this does this. And like, you're so excited about it. And then they don't have the same vision, or they just like are too afraid to take a risk. So that's definitely happened before, where you're like, but if you just tried this thing, it could be so effective. And it's like, it's counter to some internal, rule they have or whatever it is. I still feel like I'll present it though. Like I've definitely had situations where account has said like, they're never, ever, ever going to do something like that. And I've been like, please, 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 can we just make a case for it? 'Cause like, this would be so powerful. And like, most of the time they'll be like, okay, we're just telling you this is what's going to happen. And we'll be like, okay. But we're lucky that we have account people that will allow us to do that type of thing. But yeah, I don't think I'm trying to think of an example. I feel like I've definitely had different sensibilities throughout my career. Like when I was really young, I worked on a beer. It was my favorite thing in the world to work on Bud. I worked on Budweiser and Bud Light, and I loved it. It's all I wanted to do was like really raunchy humor. And like, they were so fun to write, those types of spots. But I would, like, looking back at that breadth of work today, I would probably be like, ooh.
That's not, that's not.
No, you don't say stuff like that. You know what I mean?
So do you think that you could go back? And I guess the brands have evolved as well, right? But do you think that you could go back, and if you had to start working on that brand again, how would it be different?
I think we'd have the climate now that it could be different.
It could be different.
Yeah. I mean, the casting would be different. Thank God. I mean, so much would be different now. And it's like, isn't it weird that it's only, in the last few years that's true?
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? It was the same for so long. And now all of a sudden it's different. And I'm like, yay.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So what do you, just kind of, talking about the work that you do with the podcast and the blog, what kind of advice or what kind of, what would you want to tell younger creatives coming up? If you could share one piece of advice about what they might experience coming up in this role, or, just what would you share with them if you could share it on a big scale with a bunch of, younger people that are coming up in our business?
I mean, I tell a lot of the people I train this, but like, never, ever, ever burn a bridge, ever. 'Cause like, it doesn't even matter if, that person is so deserving of it and like everybody hates them or whatever. It's like, you never know if you're going to work with them in a different capacity down the line. And this industry is so small. It's also just like, it sits weird on your person. It's like, that's stuck to you. It's not like as much about them. It's like, that's in you. If you have done something that doesn't align with who you are eventually. So like, I feel like just be nice to everybody and don't like end anything on bad terms. We've
come to that moment in the show where we got to pay off the title of the show, Confessions of a Creative Director. So Sarah May Bates, what do you want to confess to as your creative director confession? Well, I'm making it seem a lot more dramatic than it really
I'm like,
is.
I already told you I did a bunch of drugs and had a bunch of eating disorders. So I'm like, I don't think this is as salacious.
Did you let me just as a side note, was that during the time when that was happening? Was that during the time when you were already working in the business, or was that way before? That was way before.
Yeah, that was like high school and college.
Okay.
But let me think. I feel like I wanted to have something more spicy
juicy
than this.
That's okay.
But like, I used to audition for all of my spots. Like I would like make my agency watch me and like callbacks. I would never weigh in on whether or not I should get the role, but I would like try and get every single role, and I'd like leave the room while everybody watched my callback.
Wait. Back up. Wait, play this out for me. So you're saying you're involved in a commercial, like you're writing it, or and then you're like, I have an idea on who should play this character in the spot. It should be me. And then you would show up to the audition.
Yeah,
Did they know that you?
I'd already be in the room, obviously, because we're casting. And then I'd be like, I'm a girl. I'm in my mid-20s. I'm gonna audition too. And then they would like sit through me auditioning. And then later we would go through all the casting and decide who to call back. And I'd be like, I'm not gonna say if I should get a call back or not, but there's my
That was
audition.
pretty good.
Yeah. I got one callback one time. I did not get the role. I wouldn't have given myself the role either, but I just had to. It was one of those things where I'm like, there's so much money on the table that I could get, and I'm like, I just gotta put my hat in the ring at least. But I did get one role in a.
What is it? I want to look it up. I want to look it up. Is it
a man on the street role? And that was for Subaru. And it was like in the 90s, I think. Not the 90s. It was in the early 2000s. But that was not decided by me. That was like for another agency. So that's out there in the world.
That's that. I love that. How did you would people give you a hard time? Like, here she comes again. She's going to want to be in the commercial. Yeah. Like, did it become, and you were serious every time. It didn't
totally
become
serious.
Like a bit. It wasn't like a bit that you would just do. Like, you were serious.
No, I was totally serious. My excuse, I think, was like, hey, I'm SAG. I should try out. I mean, I might as well, right? And then I also trained as a stunt driver for similar reasons.
Yes, I saw that. And I wrote a note here. You need to tell us about this. What is that all about? I
had like this brilliant idea that I was going to like do all of these precision driving roles. Cause like it was really hard to cast women. And I was like, I'm good at driving. I'm going to do this. So I like went to a bunch of stunt driving schools and like graduated. And then I was like, yeah, I'm ready. And my agency, we cannot be in our own projects. That's not how, that's part of the policies. But I was still like out there for other jobs. And then as soon as I started getting jobs, I was like, I could die. I could get seriously hurt in this. Like,
but so wait. So you actually did get some work doing the stunt?
I got offered 2 different jobs. And I was like, I don't think I can take this job. Like I realized as soon as I got the jobs that I was too afraid to possibly die. And then I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to do this job anymore. It's still one of those things that I like, I'm happy I have, but I'm like, I think what part of it was like becoming a mom. I was like, I don't want my kids to maybe not have a mom because I just like, was like,
because you wanted to be in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how much of that policy, that them writing that policy about people that work at the agency can't be in the spots because of you, did they write that in there?
No.
Is that a thing? I mean, is this a common thing that I'm not aware of people working at agencies wanting to be in their own spots?
I don't know, but that was at my old agency and they did not have that rule. So it was fine. But like this, RPA has a rule. So it's fine. It was not because of me, but it exists and it's fine.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. All right, that's my dog Mac, I guess, telling me I have something to do. But Sarah, I could talk to you all day. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for just being so open and honest, and you just sound like an incredible creative director, incredible boss, somebody that you'd want to work with, and just a super, just nice, honest, straightforward person. And I'm glad that we connected. And
likewise.
I hope that we can just chat from time to time. And then I look forward to following all the great things that you do. And who knows what's next for you? It seems like you're constantly evolving and doing new things. So congratulations on all of that.
Oh, thank you. You as well. It was lovely to get to know you.
All right. We will talk soon.
Thanks so
Sarah.
much. Have a good one.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director in the books. Thanks to my very special guest, Sarah May Bates. Wasn't she awesome? I told you it was going to be a great episode. I hope that you enjoyed that and you got out as much out of it as I did, because I thought that was really amazing. So again, as I mentioned, pick up the book. What's the Big Idea by yours truly, if you're an aspiring creative director, makes a great gift for the holidays for your very special creative person, the very special creative person in your life. So pick that up on Amazon, or you can buy it, a signed copy, on my website, jaimecabreracreative.com. That's it for now. So until next time, peace, love, and creativity. See ya.
Make the love